Coming up, I'll unveil one of the central intellectual themes of the movie Vindicating Trump and the book, namely the question of why Trump is an object of more hate and derision than any figure since Lincoln. Dr. James Tour, he's a leading scientist and professor of chemistry at Rice University. He joins me. He's going to tell his remarkable story of a Jewish skeptic who accepted Christ as the Messiah. Remarkable stuff. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Guys, this is the big week. The movie Vindicating Trump opens this Friday, and that's opening weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I've mentioned before, but I want to emphasize that we're not opening this movie with limited screenings. We had to do that for earlier films because of the COVID and the post-COVID environment. But this is a normal theatrical release. So when you look up theater listings, you'll see it's playing at 12 noon, it's playing at 3 p.m., it's playing at 7 p.m. So you can decide when to go, but please go this coming weekend. Go opening weekend. Let's make this film a big success. We were delighted. I was delighted. Over the last couple of days, President Trump recorded an enthusiastic message advocating the film, saying how good it is. I sent him a private link to watch the film. So he's thrilled about it, and he sees, I think, the power of the film. And so let's support Trump. Let's get these movies to be a big success, and let's help the movie rocket out there so it can have the maximum impact and the message really gets out and makes a difference. Now, you might ask, what's in the movie? What's the intellectual content of the movie and the accompanying book? Because a book and a movie follows a storyline, but a book has to make an argument. And I like my films as well to contain an argument. In other words, not simply to be, here, let me just show you some ways in which Trump is being harassed and persecuted. No, I like to have some intellectual depth. So if you're watching the movie attentively and thoughtfully, you get a lot out of it. Now, what I'll typically do with books before they come out is I'll pull excerpts of them and publish these excerpts as articles in good and leading publications. One of the leading conservative intellectual publications is called The American Mind. It's published by the Claremont Institute, out of the Claremont colleges in California, and it's edited by a very smart guy, Spencer Clavin. And so I sent Spencer this article that is called, well, the title that they use, Why They Hate Him. And of course, Why They Hate Him refers to Trump. Now, you might say, well, of course they hate him. They call him this and they call him that. They say he's a racist. They say he's an autocrat. He's a dictator. But my point is, why did they use those particular charges, that particular line of attack? They don't have to. They could call them other things. And similarly, although they said bad things about, say, Reagan, they'd say Reagan is a washed-up movie actor. But, you know, no one said Reagan was a dictator. No one said Reagan is coming to take away all your liberties. They might say that Reagan is here to cut your taxes, or Reagan is here to privatize the government, or Reagan doesn't like government bureaucrats. So I want to give you just a hint today, drawing on this article, about what I'm getting at here. And I do it with reference to a speech given early in his career by Abraham Lincoln, and it's called the Lyceum speech. Now, it's not Lincoln's most famous speech. Lincoln's most famous speech is probably the Gettysburg Address, and his second most famous speech is the second inaugural, and his third is probably the first inaugural. So you have these magnificent speeches given by the mature and later Lincoln. Now, Lincoln here in the Lyceum speech is in his 20s. He's in his late 20s. The speech was given in 1838, so you can see more than 2 decades before the Civil War. And Lincoln, however, says something very important and very interesting and also prophetic. So Lincoln basically starts out by saying, look, we've got a government, and our government is a system of laws. It's a government of laws and not of men. And yet he says, I'm beginning to see, and this is a very troubling sign, a widespread disregard for law in our society. So think of that. That's somewhat reminiscent to today. Lincoln calls the problem mob rule. He sometimes uses the phrase the mobocratic spirit. So he says this mobocratic or lawless spirit is adrift, is spreading in the country. And you would think that Lincoln would go on to say that the mobocratic spirit is driven by the issue of slavery. But Lincoln downplays the issue of slavery in this speech. He implies that there's a kind of mobocratic spirit or lawlessness all over the place. He gives examples of Vicksburg, where gamblers have been rounded up and hanged. He talks about a black man suspected of murder in St. Louis who was burned. He talks about violence against abolitionists in Lincoln's own state of Illinois. So you can see how he's touching on slavery, but slavery is not the central issue. And I believe part of the reason for this is that Lincoln, if he were to make a list of these lawless characters, would have to in some ways include the abolitionists, because the abolitionists themselves showed a disregard for law. They broke laws. They burned the Constitution, and Lincoln knows this. Now, the way the speech turns and becomes very interesting is that Lincoln says the problem isn't just the lawless spirit in the country, it is the leadership of the country that encourages this. So Lincoln says that there might arise in America a tyrant, a Caesar, a Napoleon, an Alexander the Great, somebody with dictatorial ambitions who will exploit and tap this spirit of lawlessness and direct it to unconstitutional ends, use it to subvert our republic. And then Lincoln goes on to talk about who are these kinds of people that are these dictators. And he says, by and large, that these are people who think of themselves as large, as having dimensions that are bigger than normal people. He says that they belong, quote, to the family of the lion or the tribe of the eagle. In other words, these are people who think that they are so great and so powerful that normal laws should not apply to them. And Lincoln is almost showing a certain admiration, or at least a certain grudging respect for this kind of a leader that has these larger-than-life dimensions and has this kind of titanic aspiration. Lincoln never says who these people are. Who are the people who are going to become a Caesar in America? Is he talking about Stephen Douglas, his main political rival? Is he talking about the senator from South Carolina, John C. Calhoun, who was the leader of the pro-slavery movement? And Lincoln doesn't really say. He even implies at one point that he himself could be at some point accused of being this kind of a dictator, because he says this. He says, this kind of a Caesar may use his power to emancipate slaves or to shackle freemen. So he's not just worried about a tyrant who would do bad things, which is take a free man and shackle him or put him into slavery. He's also worried about a tyrant who would aspire to do good things, like free the slaves. I think what Lincoln is saying is that if you want to free the slaves, you have to do it the constitutional way. And Lincoln, I think, is almost foreseeing his own future career and saying, if it is ever up to me, I will not be a Caesar. I will not subvert the constitutional republic. I might have that kind of power. And by the way, under wartime conditions, Lincoln did have that kind of power. He was in fact accused of being a tyrant. So think of how eerily this speech forecasts the very accusations that would be flung against Lincoln. Now, why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because, not just because it applies to Lincoln's time, but it also applies to our own time. And in our own time, of course, there have been articles that have talked about the Lyceum speech and said, you know what? Lincoln was prophesying the rise of a tyrant, the rise of a tyrannical regime, and guess what? We have the tyrant. His name is Donald J. Trump. Here we go. This is exactly the peril that Lincoln forecast. And some of the never-Trumpers who have actually declared that they are either not voting for Trump or they are for Kamala Harris claim that they're doing it for this exact reason: to save democracy, to save America from an aspiring and would-be dictator like Donald Trump. And then in the article, I give quotes, the Never Trump columnist Bret Stephens in the New York Times, and he says, Lincoln knew in 1838, quote, what America would face in our own time. Men like Trump, he says, represent, quote, men in the mold of Caesar or Napoleon who would sooner tear down than defend Republican institutions in order to slake a thirst for glory. And now, when we come back, I want to pick this up and make the case that, yes, the threat of tyranny or dictatorship is real, just as Lincoln foresaw, but it doesn't come from Trump. With the massive tax hikes proposed by Harris, an almost 40% top income tax rate, 7% increase to the corporate tax, a capital gains tax on unrealized gains, her proposals could add almost $2 trillion to a current $2 trillion deficit. You might be thinking it's time to make more of your savings tax sheltered and inflation sheltered. This is where the people at Birch Gold Group can help you. Birch Gold will assist you in converting an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. And the best news, you don't pay a penny out of pocket. Just text the word Dinesh to 989898. You'll get a free information kit on gold. There's no obligation, only information on fortifying your savings before the crazy really hits. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers like me and Debbie, you should contact Birch Gold too. So go ahead, text Dinesh to the number 989898 for your information kit today. I want to talk to you about Balance of Nature, but hold off on purchasing your first order from Balance of Nature because I have some information you need to hear. If you go to balanceofnature.com to buy their popular fruits and veggie supplements, a discount offer will pop up. It may say 20 or 25% off your first order. Don't click that, because if you use my code, you'll get 35% off your first order, plus free shipping. So what's my special code? It's the word America. Use my code and you will save big. And here's another bonus. Balance of Nature has a risk-free money-back guarantee. So go ahead, find out for yourself what I already know. There's no other product out there like Balance of Nature when it comes to fruit and veggie supplements. Whether you order online or call direct, you got to use promo code America to get the special offer of 35% off and free shipping. Here's the number to call, 800-246-8751, 800-246-8751. Or you can go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you'll get 35% off. I'm talking about Lincoln and Trump and the threat of tyranny, and Debbie yells out, "Don't give it all away. You want them to see the movie, don't you?" And I'm like, well, listen, I am talking about themes that I discuss in depth in the article and in the book. They are there in the film, but I think you know that a film is a completely different thing than laying out a thesis or an essay in this mode. Imagine if I were to sit you down and say, listen, let me tell you about the problems in the penal system of America with a specific reference to the Shawshank prison in America in the middle of the 20th century. And then I go on to tell you what the problems are in the prison system and what the inmates have to go through. Would that be any substitute for seeing the Shawshank Redemption? Of course not. The experience is utterly and totally different. And yet, knowing some background about these films, let's say you knew some background about Chariots of Fire, you knew something about the Paris Olympics, you knew what it meant to people, to young people in the immediate or the aftermath of World War I, when heroism was achieved, and in many cases not achieved, on the battlefield, massive casualties in a terrible war. But nevertheless, the quest for achievement, for greatness, for trying to prove something both about yourself and about your country remains after World War I. And that is the kind of animating force of the Paris Olympics, which features, of course, the great running achievements of the British sprinter Harold Abrams, and then, of course, the Scottish runner Eric Liddell. Back we go to Lincoln and to Trump. Now, here's the point, that Trump is a larger-than-life figure. In that sense, Trump resembles Lincoln. Trump was a massive cultural celebrity that before he came into politics. And you really can't say that of anyone else. I was on a podcast yesterday and someone goes, well, wasn't Reagan a cultural celebrity? Wasn't Reagan an actor and a well-known actor for most of his career? And the answer is, well, actually, the comparison doesn't really work. Reagan in Hollywood was never a massive figure, no. Reagan was a good actor. He was respected. He had a few roles that were very memorable. But Reagan was no Jimmy Stewart. Reagan was no Cary Grant. Reagan was no Humphrey Bogart. Those guys were superstars in Hollywood. And by the time we got to the 1970s, Reagan really wasn't acting anymore. In fact, one of the common derisive phrases against Reagan, he's a washed-up movie actor. That's what the left tried to dismiss him that way. But Trump was, before he entered politics, one of the biggest brands in the world. And so the left, I think, recognizes the largeness of Trump. Trump is not a dictator. In fact, he didn't do anything dictatorial in the slightest. But I think the point I want to make here, and this is really gets to why they call him that, he has that kind of dimension, like Lincoln. He is a larger-than-life figure. You see it in very simple ways. You take a big room of 500 people, and you ask of the political figures of our day if they, without announcement, just walk into the room, will the whole room turn its head yes or no? And I think in 9 out of 10 cases you say no. I've actually seen this happen with Joe Biden on multiple occasions. Not even in a room of 500 people. Joe Biden will go into a train compartment with 7 people and none of them will look up. And Kamala Harris is the same. And most Republican rivals to Trump are the same. They don't have that kind of magnetic power. Now, Reagan did have it. And maybe in Reagan's case, it was tied to the fact that Reagan was a movie actor. Reagan knew how to carry himself. Reagan always had this kind of striking gait. But Trump does. Trump walks into the room and there's a new kind of buzz. There's a new kind of electricity in the room. And so the analogy from the Lyceum speech gains its momentum in this way, that Trump has the dimensions of a Caesar, but he doesn't really want to be a Caesar. He doesn't want to exercise his power in this way. And I have a very interesting one-on-one with Trump in which we specifically get into this. And I won't go into what Trump says. I can't quote it from memory anyway, but it is reflective, it is thoughtful, and it is striking. So you'll hear from Trump on that directly. But you need a could-be Caesar, if you will, to defeat an actual Caesar. Now, who's the actual Caesar? It's the left. It's the Democrats. They're the ones establishing a tyrannical regime in this country. They're the ones who are doing mass surveillance. They're the ones who are doing systematic censorship. They're the ones who are doing massive propaganda in the media and in the universities. They're the ones who are criminalizing political differences. They're the ones who are trying to lock the leading political opponent, Trump, in jail. They're the ones who control the police agencies of government. Have you ever heard of a dictator? Debbie has a funny line, which actually, I must admit, I sort of stole from her for the book. And that is, if Trump is a dictator, he is far and away the worst dictator in the history of the world. Because
in the history of dictators.
In the history of dictatorship, exactly. So the dictatorship, the point we're making here is the dictatorship is a threat, but it's a threat that's coming from the left and from the Democrats. The difference, of course, is that while Caesar was pretty much upfront in being a dictator, not totally. If you read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Caesar slightly disguises his aspirations to be an emperor. At one point, Mark Antony hands him a crown. It's a little kind of play crown. 3 times Mark Antony hands it to him, and 3 times Caesar goes, "Oh no, I don't want that. I don't want that." But of course, Caesar does want it. He knows that it is better for him to pretend not to want it, and that is going to make it more likely that he will actually get the crown eventually. Now, Caesar, in fact, was assassinated. He didn't get the crown. Ultimately, the crown, in effect, went to Augustus Caesar. But Caesar, at least in principle, does not shrink from being a Caesar. But our dictatorial regime today pretends not to be that. They pretend to be, well, we are upholding the rule of law. We are saving democracy. We're the protectors of democracy. So they are wolves who are disguised as sheep. And I think the point of Lincoln's Lyceum address is that the person who can defeat the wolf is the good shepherd. The shepherd who is stronger than the wolf, but doesn't have the same motivation as the wolf. In other words, the good shepherd is the shepherd that looks out for the sheep. The good shepherd is the defender of the sheep against the wolf. But imagine if the good shepherd was so weak that he was eaten by the wolf himself. Well, that would leave the sheep even more vulnerable. And I think here you see, in a nutshell, the problem with some of the Republican establishment. They are sort of like wimpy shepherds. And not only are they wimpy shepherds, but they are bad shepherds, because when the wolf comes after them, they flee. They abandon the sheep. They run away. They leave their own troops on the battlefield. They won't say a word about January 6th. They want to be as far away from it as possible. They don't want to be called election deniers. But the good shepherd is actually strong. And the good shepherd is more than a match for the wolf. And this is the point about Trump. A lot of times, even Republicans are a little uneasy about Trump because they recognize that he has this larger-than-life dimension. They're always trying to cut Trump down to size to sort of tame Trump. But here's the problem. If Trump were, quote, tame, he wouldn't be the kind of formidable figure that the left would have to fear. He would be more of a Romney. He'd be more of a McCain. He'd be more of the kind of guy who gets into the ring, doesn't really throw any punches or throws a few half-hearted punches, then gets pummeled to the ground, but leaves smiling, applauding for the fact that the other guy won and he lost. And that's not Trump. Trump doesn't want to lose. He doesn't think losing is a joke. He doesn't laugh about it. He recognizes that and the reason losing isn't a joke is not because Trump is a bad sportsman. It's because the country itself is at stake. Losing America is not a joke. If you lose America in a certain way, you can't get it back. And Trump recognizes it. He recognizes the stakes involved. He recognizes that to fight an 800-pound gorilla on the other side, we need an 800-pound gorilla on our side. And that, I think, is the case in a nutshell for Donald Trump. And that is a way of understanding the meaning of the Lyceum speech as transposed into our own time. So once again, guys, vindicatingtrump.com, that's the movie website. Get your tickets there. By the way, today, Monday, a whole bunch of new theaters are going to be added. I got a couple of messages from people who go, oh, the theater's 45 minutes away. Well, okay, if you have to go 45 minutes, go 45 minutes. But there'll be a bunch more theaters that go up today and probably even tomorrow, Tuesday. and we should have 800 to 1,000 theaters up and running. So this is a very nice, they call it a wide opening nationwide. Make sure you go, round up your family and friends. Let's make this coming weekend, a big success. As we get older, it's easy to overlook, but getting your hearing checked is crucial. Did you know that untreated hearing loss can lead to social isolation, depression, even cognitive decline? That's why it's so important to take action early, and this is where Hear.com comes in. They have a 360 digital approach to help you act on your hearing loss, from personalized consultations to the latest in hearing aid technology. They've got you covered. Dr. Marco Viator and Paul Crusius have been creating successful businesses since college. Now they lead Hear.com. It's the fastest growing hearing aid company in the world. They started Hear.com with a simple mission: make world-class hearing aids easily accessible for everyone, no matter what their lifestyle or their budget. After years of research and development alongside top German engineers, they're proud to unveil their most innovative device yet, Horizon, by Hear.com. Go to Hear.com/Dinesh. Get your 45-day no-risk trial plus a free hearing consultation. Again, that's Hear, HEAR.com/Dinesh. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing Share Right, healthcare done the right way. At Share Right, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With Share Right, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. Think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. Share Right ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With Share Right, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome a new guest to the podcast, Dr. James Tour. He's a professor of chemistry and also of computer science at Rice University in Texas. He's also taught at the University of South Carolina and University of Wisconsin. He did his postgraduate training also at Stanford University. He's an organic chemist. This is a man with honestly, a ridiculous amount of research publications and 200 patents. I'm getting a little dizzy even reading this description. Follow him on X at Dr. Dr. James Tour, Tour. And welcome, Dr. Tour. Thank you for joining me. I came across your work when Debbie, my wife, showed me a kind of a testimony that you did, and it was so kind of disarming and lucid and interesting that I thought, gosh, I have to have him on the podcast just to discover more about him and his work, and also find out how somebody with your background, your scientific background, but also your religious background, came to sort of find Christ. Can I begin by just asking you to say a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, and a little bit about how you were raised?
Sure, thank you. I was born in New York City, raised just north of the city in a secular Jewish home. When I went to college, I met a young man and we started talking, and he gave me an illustration of the gospel. And he had me read a verse out of Romans. It says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." And I told him, I'm not a sinner. And I didn't feel like a sinner. I told him I never killed anybody. I never robbed a bank. How could I be a sinner? Then he showed me a verse out of Matthew 5:28, which says that if you look at a woman with lust for her, you've committed adultery with her already in your heart. And I was really taken aback by this, because I was addicted to pornography from the age of 14. I was working in a gas station on the highway just north of New York City. My job was to clean the restrooms and the parking lots, and I was finding these magazines there that men would throw out, particularly on Friday nights on their way home, and I became addicted, and I couldn't look at a woman any other way. Here I was 18 years old, and I was deeply convicted, and the question comes, why should I even be convicted? Why should I even care what a man is saying from 2,000 years ago? I didn't know Jesus was Jewish. I mean, who knew? The rabbis used to tell us that Jesus was Christian. And so, but his words have enormous power over us when he's trying to get a hold of our hearts. And I was really, really surprised. And how could I commit adultery in my heart? I thought adultery is a physical thing. I knew adultery was wrong, but how could I commit that in my heart? And then he started to show me more verses about Jesus and his life and how to be saved. And a few months later, I was still heavily convicted of this sin. And I was all alone in my room. And I got on my knees, not even sure why I got on my knees. Most Christians I had seen sit, and Jews normally stand. And I said, Lord, forgive me. Forgive me. I am a sinner. And all of a sudden, I felt this amazing peace start to fill the room. It was an extraordinary peace. And then all of a sudden, off to my right, Jesus is standing, just like 3 feet away. And it wasn't a clear optical thing, but I knew this was Jesus right here. And I put my face to the ground. I was already on my knees, and I just was weeping because it was like liquid love being poured over me. I had never experienced love like this before, and kindness, forgiveness. There was no fear, and he wasn't gone in an instant. He was just staying there. I've never had a day like that before. Before that, I never had a day like that afterwards. That was unique in my life. After a while, I got up, I wiped my tears, and I couldn't stop thinking about Jesus. I was thinking about him all the time. I was dreaming about Jesus. In my dreams, I'm telling people about Jesus. I had no idea what was going on. Here's a Jewish kid telling people about Jesus in his dreams. And I didn't know that that dream was prophetic, that he was describing to me what I would spend my life doing. And the young man who had shared with me back in August, here it was November, several months earlier, he saw me walking on the dormitory floor. He says, Jim, did you receive Jesus in your heart? I said, I think I have. Why do you ask? He says, you haven't stopped smiling for weeks. Something's different about you. And I was different. And I said, how can I stay close to God like this? I've never felt like this before. He said, if you read your Bible every day, you'll stay close to God. If you don't, you won't. So for 46 years, I've read the scriptures every day. Every day. I read from Genesis chapter 1 through Revelation 22. I'm in no hurry. I can spend a week in a paragraph. When I'm done, I start again. And he broke me, that very moment, he broke me of pornography. I mean, I had a lot of other problems, but he showed me my sin through exposing it through pornography to me, my addiction to pornography. And then he showed me his power by delivering me from that. And I've been walking with him ever since.
Let's zoom in for a moment to that experience of seeing Jesus, because I think I'm immensely curious, and others will be probably also. All of us want to have some direct experience of God. We experience God, we pray to God, we experience God perhaps sometimes through an inner feeling like God is telling me to do this or to do that. But that's a little different from the way we experience, say, other people whom we experience directly. When you felt Jesus in the room, did you see anything, or was it a kind of sense that there's you know how you sometimes feel there's somebody in the room even though you don't see them? What was it actually like?
Yes, I mean, people ask me that. That's why I say it was not a clear optical vision. It was a presence that was so overwhelmingly strong. I knew this was Jesus, and there was no question in my mind who this was. And the presence was so overwhelming. So it was not a clear optical thing, but it's funny you should ask, because many Jews have this experience. Muslims, for example, will often experience Jesus in a dream, because Muslims put a lot of value in dreams. In the Western world, we don't generally, but Muslims do. And so he gives us what we need. I think Jews often need a little bit more, so he gives us that which we need.
Could it be, I've, at least from my kind of learning and knowledge about Islam and Judaism both, they are, number one, they're really codes and religions of law. And the emphasis is very much on, not even so much on inner motivation, but it's on conformity, it's on action. These are the rules, you have to abide by the rules. And so, for example, to take the example of, let's say, the Muslim girl wearing the parda or the veil, it's not about whether she's inwardly modest, she may be or she may not be, but the bottom line of it is she needs to wear the veil. That's the rule. I think what's interesting about Jesus, also from the quotation that you gave, enormous concern with your motivation. So the passage that you mentioned about, for example, looking with a woman with lust in your heart, you don't have to do anything. It is your inner motivation, your inner intention that defines, if you will, the sin. When you first encountered it that way, did you wrestle with that idea? Like, wow, you mean to say I can sin just like in my mind without doing anything? And how did you come to believe that you actually could?
Well, when I read that verse, it was clear. I mean, to commit adultery in the heart, I was not a very good Jew, but I was enough of a Jew to know that adultery was one of the 10 commandments, one of the things that I shouldn't violate. But then committing adultery in your heart, how can that be? And everything that I knew in Judaism was what I knew. Again, I'm not speaking for Orthodox Jews. I'm speaking for who I was as a secular Jew, is I had to do things to please God. And this is the same thing as described to us in the book of Romans. And this is what I felt. You wear a little yarmulke on your head. You please God. You go to synagogue. You please God. You light this candle. You say this prayer. You'll please God. And then one of the verses he showed me was Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, that by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's a gift of God. It's not a result of works, that no one should boast. And twice in that sentence, he says, it's not of yourselves, it's not a result of works, which is so antithetical to what I knew. Now, it's not that good works aren't necessary. In fact, Ephesians 2:10 says that he has created us to do good works, which he has prepared for us to do. It's just that getting in the family, I liken it to this when I describe this to people. It's like a single woman giving birth to a child, and she's putting that child up for adoption. And there's a young couple there that right in the hospital going to adopt that child. There's nothing that child has done to warrant getting into that new good home. Nothing. But once the child is in that family, as the child grows, there's going to be expectations. You're going to clean your room. You're going to obey your mother and father. You're going to eat dinner with the family. You're going to go to school. You're going to do your homework. So the works come after we're in the family, but getting in the family is purely by grace. I mean, none of us would get into the family if it were not purely by grace, and or else it would be as difficult through grace as it is through the law. If there was something that we had to do this ourselves, and so it was quite freeing that I didn't have to work my way into this. But there were expectations upon me once I was in.
We'll be right back with Dr. James Tour to talk more about his discovery of God and Jesus and Christ as the Messiah. Once again, MyPillow has been canceled by another box store, so they are passing an incredible offer exclusively to my viewers and listeners. The standard MyPillow retails for $49.98 for a limited time. You can have one for only $14.98. Wait, is that a typo? No, it's not. $14.98. Don't miss out on this amazing deal while supplies last. Order now using promo code Dinesh, or you can call 800-876-0227. That's not all. Get a 4-piece towel set for just $25, a brand new mattress topper as low as $69.98, the famous MyPillow bed sheets as low as $25, and there's a lot more. To get all the discounts, including the standard size MyPillow, just $14.98, limited, by the way, to 10 per order. Go to mypillow.com and don't forget to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. Back with Dr. James Tour, professor of chemistry and computer science at Rice University. Follow him on X at Dr. Dr. James Tour, Tour. Dr. Tour, let me ask you this. When we look at the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament, and the New Testament, there is at least Christians believe, a deep compatibility between the two. But as you know, historically, Jews have tended to believe that there isn't, that the New Testament is not a fulfillment in any way of the Old. And of course, the early Jews of the early centuries did not recognize Christ as the Messiah. Their argument was, we're looking for a Messiah very different from this guy. Now, when you discover Jesus not through this kind of an historical type of argument. You discovered Jesus almost directly through the kind of vivid and unforgettable moral teachings of Jesus. But now, as you read the Bible, like start to finish, how do you see the kind of harmony or disharmony between the Old Testament and the New?
I don't know how Gentiles can enjoy the New Testament. I mean, it's so Jewish. I mean, the whole thing is so Jewish, time and time again. You understand so much under the context of Jesus being a Jew. I mean, his disdain for the laws that men had built around each commandment. So there were 613 commandments of Moses. Human beings, men, have built sometimes over 1,000 regulations around each one of those commandments. And that came, and I understand how it came. After the diaspora into Babylon, they came back, they said, we really blew it. We got to make sure we don't get near violating any of these things. And so they put all these rules and regulations, but Jesus had this enormous disdain for that because it so burdened people that you missed God. I see God all over, but the early Jews, all the disciples were Jewish. All the people coming in were Jewish. It wasn't until later that the Gentiles started coming in. So yes, not all Jews received, but a lot of Jews received. It was actually through the rabbinical teachings that it dissuaded people from investigating this Jesus as the Messiah. So the Jewish concept, a common Jewish concept, is that there's two Messiahs. There's Messiah, the son of Joseph from Ephraim, an Ephraimite, which was going to be the suffering Messiah, and then Messiah, the son of David, Messiah ben David, that would be the conquering and reigning one. And so they break this into two, and they say Jesus is not what we expect. They never even have read Isaiah 52:13 through all of Isaiah 53 because it's not read in the typical readings. So it's much like when they go to the synagogue, a portion from the Torah, the first 5 books is read, and they'll complete that in a year. And then they'll also read a complementary portion from the prophets, but they skip Isaiah 52:13 and through all of 53. I mean, one of the most vivid passages of Jesus in the Old Testament describing crucifixion 500 years before it was even invented. And so I see Jesus all over this. But the reason why I was open to this, and many Jews are not, is because most Jews are not a clean slate. Most Jews have functioned under rabbinical teachings, and the rabbis teach you against Jesus. You read in the rabbinical writings themselves, the early rabbinical writings from the 2nd century onward. I mean, the things that were written, nothing was ever written nice about Jesus. So you're dissuaded from it. Speaking to a Jew is not speaking to a clean slate. But what it is through the witness of faithful Gentiles that Jews are convicted. The Jews see this love for God and they're brought in. This is exactly what's described in Romans chapter 11. It is the Gentile witness that draws the Jew. Many people say, oh, talk to my Jewish friend. I'm like, you talk to your Jewish friend. You display how good God is to them, and they'll be drawn. And then once the Jew comes in, they turn out to be amazing evangelists toward the Gentiles. And that's the pattern you see in Romans 11, that the Gentiles will be a witness to the Jews, and the Jews will come in and be a witness to the Gentiles. The Lord is so good in the way he's figured this all out.
I mean, that is so cool. And it's a reversal of the ancient pattern, right? Because obviously originally it was Jews who went out. Everybody else was Gentile or pagan, and the Jews were, in a way, the missionaries. And Paul, of course, being perhaps the leading one of them. Let me shift gears only slightly to talk about Jesus and Christianity, but in the context now of your profession, because there has been, since the Enlightenment, this sort of idea that science points away from God, not by somehow refuting God, but by giving naturalistic explanations of everything. So that the argument, if I can put it bluntly, is something like this, that in the ancient world, people believed everything is full of spirits. Animism. The river flows because the river god moves it, and so on. And then with monotheism, you get the idea that no, it's not the river god and the thunder god. There's only one God, but that God is a spirit, and that spirit created everything and moves everything and has sovereignty over the universe. But science has shown us, so the argument goes, that no, these are material objects and they operate, if you will, according to naturalistic laws. And you're a chemist. You take things apart. You know how things are put together. How do you think about this issue of, if you will, science and God and the compatibility between those two?
I think the rookie says that they are incompatible. The rookie in science or the rookie in the understanding of the scriptures, where you will take a scientist who's never read the Bible and they'll make a judgment on the Bible that there's really nothing here. Or they may have looked at it for 15 minutes. Can you imagine if somebody took my undergraduate organic chemistry textbook that I teach out of? It's 1,200 pages. And looked at it for 15 minutes and then said, there's nothing here. This is a bunch of nonsense. I'd be like, I'm speaking to an idiot right now. I'm speaking to an idiot. The same thing happens when somebody looks at the Bible for 15 minutes and makes a judgment call on it. I'm speaking to an idiot. And so what happens is when you study these texts, I have never seen anything in the Bible go contrary to a fact of science. Now, I've seen it go contrary to a proposal of science, to a speculation of science, to a hypothesis of science, but never contrary to a fact of science. And these so-called hypotheses, these proposals of science change all the time, certainly on the order of decades. I mean, big things change all the time in science. So I don't see any problem between the two. And the interesting thing is that the people who would like to suggest that there are, I've challenged over and over again chemists on the origin of life. Tell me how life began. Show me the chemistry. Show me the chemistry. And it is so interesting that none of them will go toe-to-toe with me on this. And I've invited them on my YouTube channel, YouTube Dr. James Tour. I've invited them. I said, I'll come on your channel. We'll do it on a neutral channel. We'll have the discussion. Any PhD, the person who will contest with me is the person who doesn't understand chemistry. The person who understands chemistry sees that we are clueless on where life came from to begin with. We can't even define how life could have happened. Nobody can even give a proposal on how life could have occurred, might have occurred, whether it's on this planet or on any other planet, how first life might have occurred. I mean, even the very basic things we are clueless upon in science. Now, there are silly little proposals, but as soon as you start questioning, how did that happen? Everything withers around the edges. So for me, I don't see any problem with it.
You're making a point of supreme importance that I just want to stress, and that is this, that a lot of people crudely think that somehow Darwin accounted for the origin of life and the transformation of life. And that is, in fact, as you well know, not true. Darwin took life for granted and sought to explain through evolution how one life form could become another under certain conditions of adaptation and environmental stress. But what you're saying, I think, is that, how we got life in the first place remains shrouded in the same kind of mystery that it was since the ancient Greeks.
That is right. And we are clueless on life's origin. The molecules that we propose could never have been made on an early Earth. And even if they had been made, they wouldn't last, RNA wouldn't last more than hours on an early Earth. not more than hours. Even in a lab, if you have one molecule of the right constituency to do something viable, it wouldn't last more than hours. I mean, this is silliness. And you say that time makes this happen. And I've never used a God of the gaps argument. Never. I've never said because we don't understand, therefore God. I don't have to bring God into this. I just say we don't understand, period. And one day we might. But as far as right now, not only do we not understand, but we get further from understanding every year. And you say, well, how can that be? It's because we start understanding the complexity of the cell more and more every year. And it's so utterly complex that every year we learn more about the levels of complexity, that the target that we're going toward is moving away from us much further than we are approaching. You say, well, cells were much simpler back then. This has all been calculated. Biophysicists have figured out the simplest of cells that could exist. And in fact, the simplest cells that we find in the fossil record are about the same complexity as the simplest cells we have today, number one. Number two, you can calculate the number of parts that you are going to need, the number of functioning parts you're going to need to have an existing cell. All life that we know comes around cells. You have to have the cell. And we can calculate that, and we are clueless. And of all the 20 or so parts that are needed, zero of them have ever been built in a laboratory using prebiotic methods. Zero of them. We've never made life. We don't know how to make life. And so this is an area in which I work, being a synthetic chemist. This is the area that I understand. And so I challenge the community on this, and I think it's telling that they have never challenged me on it. They won't address me on this.
I remember some years ago, I just picked up almost casually a book by maybe a guy that you know. This was Franklin Harold's book on the cell. It was just a description of the cell and the machinery of the cell. And the point that I took away from that book was simply the cell is a kind of a supercomputer. And moreover, he went on to say, and he's writing from a completely secular point of view, he goes, well, the cell didn't evolve. The cell comes, in a sense, ready-made. We can now talk about the evolution of one life form containing cells into another life form containing cells, but the cell itself did not evolve. So here we have ready-made, in a sense, a supercomputer without any knowledge of how we got that supercomputer in the first place. Do you agree with that description of things?
Yeah, I think actually it's a little bit too simplified because the cell is like a factory. It has much more than just computation. It has moving parts. It has moving materials from one side to the other, things that a supercomputer never really does other than moving electrons or information. I mean, this is doing that as well. But even those who have contested with me are now coming around and saying, there must have been some contingent information that came from outside the first cell, because the information could not have been inherent in Luca, the first cell from which all life is generated. It couldn't have happened. There had to be some information from outside the cell. And the information is highly complex. And so even people are beginning to see that today, to the point where they're saying, you know, these things had a causal history. That's the new term. They don't like to use design. They certainly will not use God, but they'll use the term causal history. So they're backing into God, actually, this causal history, and they're trying to lighten the blow as they're coming into the reality of this.
This is really astounding stuff. And Dr. Tour, I mean, I advise you to consider writing a book on this. This is an amazing and interesting topic, and I'm not, you know, I've done some work in Christian apologetics, but I've never seen this particular topic covered. Guys, I've been talking to Dr. James Tour, professor of chemistry and also computer science at Rice University. Follow him on X at Dr. Dr. James Tour. You can also find him on YouTube. Dr. Tour, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.